QSO Today, episode 498, Glam NW6S. This episode of QSO Today is listener-sponsored. Only you can keep the QSO Today podcast coming to you every weekend since 2014. Please become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor banner on the show notes page or at the top of the QSOtoday.com webpage. I want to thank Daniel Douglas, N6XQX, a QSO Today listener sponsor, for his generous donation of $200, and Jordan Macauer, WA2BRV, for his generous donation of $50. I also want to thank these regular listener sponsors, John Grusel, KC90JV, who became a monthly listener sponsor at $10 per month, and Bill Collins, WA5DSS, who has been a monthly sponsor for years. Thanks, Bill. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, amateur call sign 4Z1UG, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing ham radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio, do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates through in-depth interviews just how amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. It was brought to my attention that Larry Staples, W0AIB, my guest in episode 170, and the publisher of Larry's List, passed away last week at the ripe old age of 93. My condolences to his family and friends. May his memory be for a blessing. Dr. Charles Powell, NK80, my guest in episode 488, was the most recent guest of the Ham Radio Workbench podcast. In addition to my interview, George, KJ6VU, and company did an even deeper dive with Charles into operations around the world. There is a link to the Workbench podcast on every show notes page. If you are new to the QSO Today podcast, please be sure to look at the QSOtoday.com website, where we have almost 500 interviews with amateur radio operators. From there, you can click on links that take you to the QSO Today Academy. Our catalog contains over 500 videos on every ham radio subject, completely searchable. Glam Natalie Gray, NW6S, is a lot of things, including actress, comedian, writer for both film and television, painter, and now an amateur radio operator. The awareness of amateur radio came to Natalie almost naturally and has become an enjoyable sideline in her life. As Glamham on TikTok, she has amassed almost 100,000 subscribers who are interested in what she has to say and demonstrates about amateur radio. NW6S is my QSO today. NW6S, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Natalie?
Copy that, 4Z1UG. This is Glamham, NW6S. You are 5'9", coming into Los Angeles.
That sounds great, Natalie. Thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Now, I understand from your background that you don't have a long amateur radio story, but you do have a long story. Could we start at the beginning, and can we talk about how you came to be in Los Angeles? And I'll ask you more specific questions, but let's kind of start where you grew up and what was your original QTH.
Sure. Original QTH location was Birmingham, UK, Birmingham, England. I grew up there, and my dad was in a band, and first few years of my life, we were sort of touring, which was not a good childhood at all. But my mum and dad have the memories. I remember being really good at cleaning up shot glasses. So that's got to account for some sort of training in life. And then when I was a teenager, we did a lot of traveling, and we moved over to Canada, but we kept flip-flopping a lot between Canada and the UK. And that's been a lot of my life, is flip-flopping from different countries. So I spent a great deal of time in Canada, and I was in theater in England as a child, and then I was on TV in Canada, and then I lived over in Europe for a while, lived in New York, and then was back in the UK for quite a few years and had my own production company over at Pinewood Studios.
So Pinewood Studios is famous for just about every James Bond movie.
Yes. In fact, my office backed onto James Bond's apartment.
Is that right?
Yeah, so the back wall of my office backed onto James Bond's apartment, and the front window, I overlooked Lucasfilm, which was quite amusing because if you've never seen a stormtrooper texting, it is a sight to behold.
So these are the guys in the white plastic outfits from the original Star Wars.
Yes, yes. Good times, good memories there at Pinewood, and really nice people.
So I was going to ask you what sparked your first interest in entertainment, but it sounds to me that you were part of an entertainment family, and whether you liked it or not, you got taken on the road.
I think as far as me pursuing it, though, it was the opposite of that, because I joke, but I speak with truth, that it was not a good childhood back then. I mean, my dad was really young and my mum was really young when they had me, which has been lovely. Like, me and my mum are kind of like best friends, but I think when you're a 21-year-old man in a band and suddenly you have a kid and you've got the world ahead of you and you can tour the world with your band, and suddenly you have this kid, I don't know if it's most ideal situation. But as I grew older, I knew from when I was really young, before I could speak, I knew I wanted to work in entertainment. And I think part of it, truthfully, was the dysfunction in the household. And my dad would be on TV in his band. He was on TV a lot in this UK equivalent of Star Search, which was called Johnny Neal and the Starliners. And my dad was not Johnny Neal. He was the bass player, but they won 6 times in a row. So they got a lot of notoriety because this was a big national TV show. I mean, these days it would be the equivalent of like being on American Idol and being at the finals for 7 weeks, you know. So it was a really big deal, and they toured a lot. And I remember this is when we had our little black and white TV sets, and we had a tiny little one in the living room. And I remember looking at it. Literally, I have this memory as a toddler of looking at this tiny TV, black and white, and seeing my dad on it and thinking, he looks way happier in there than at home. I want to be in there. I want to be behind that glass. And I never, ever lost that feeling as I grew up. It was a really strong draw. I want to be behind that glass where people are happy. By the time I was sort of 11 and 12, I had wrangled myself into this all-adult theater group. And my parents were busy being young and making their own happy memories. So they were definitely nothing against them. I'm sure as a parent, I probably would have been the same back then. But as I was saying, you know, I think I want to be in the theater. And I'm like 10 and 11. And my mom and dad are like, it just did not register on their Richter scale at all. Like, it just didn't flag as, oh, well, let's drive you over there. So I literally found my own rides to the theater. And sure enough, you know, somebody took sympathy on me, and they would drive me. This nice lady, I think her name was Wendy. And they told me, we can't let a child, this is an adult theater group. But I guess I was so committed and, you know, just so passionate to be. And then within 3 months, they cast me as their starring role of Aladdin in their theater production. So I was 13 playing Aladdin, and my fairy princess, or my princess that I fall in love with as Aladdin in the pantomime, she was 22 and I was 13.
So you were playing the male part.
I was playing the male, yes, which probably was foreshadowing that all my careers I've ever got into were pretty much male dominated, because I've had quite a few careers. I mean, stand-up comedy and shoe design and this sort of thing. And now ham radio, and everything has always been very male dominated, which I don't mind at all. But it's interesting, even way back then, that I was playing a man at 13 years old.
Was this in Canada?
No, that was in the UK.
If you were playing a role like this, I know now that, like for the role of Billy Elliot, either it's the law or the unions don't allow child actors to work every night. So, like, if Billy Elliot's playing on Broadway 3 times on Saturday or whatever, they've got 3 Billy Elliots running in order to keep the kids from overworking. Were there these concerns in Britain in those days?
I mean, I highly doubt it, number one. And also, I wasn't on the West End in London. I was up in Birmingham. And, you know, we wouldn't have had with our productions those giant runs that they have in London, you know. So it definitely wasn't a concern. And truthfully, I don't think anybody would have cared anyway. I mean, we're talking about a time period where kids were left in unlocked cars, where parents were in the pub, you know, and parents would come out and check on their kids with a bag of crisps, which over here is a bag of potato chips. And, you know, you kind of babysat yourself no matter what age you were. I mean, when I used to do stand up, I would say my parents would leave the car unlocked and I was never kidnapped. But I feel that my parents were optimistic. Like I would just be left for hours in the car unlocked. They'd come back out. She's still here. Here's a bag of crisps, you know.
I saw a video of you actually on something that would look like Nickelodeon in America.
Yes.
But it was a show in Canada where you were actually the host.
Yes.
The female host of a talk show in your teens.
Yes, I was.
What was that?
So that show was called Switchback. And I did it. First off, I was on a soap opera when I was 16, playing the evil person. So they dyed my hair black, and it was right at that time of like Joan Collins and Dynasty and everything. So it was sort of like if you were going to be an evil person, you had to have your hair dyed black. Was the logic behind it, you know, which was quite funny. And then right after doing that soap opera, I was on a show called Switchback and I co-hosted it. And that was super fun. So I was on that from sort of like when I was 17 years old. And it was so fun because that was where I first started to develop some comedy interest because I got to write all my own stuff. Now this, you were talking about unions and laws and stuff. This was a CBC show. And what's funny is I was hired as sort of the co-host and I wrote all my own material. And one day I passed the office and I heard the executive producer saying, well, you know, Natalie doesn't realize that she should really be in the Writers Guild. So we're not paying her to write, but she doesn't know that. So I was writing all my own stuff, but it didn't bother me. I was so happy to be doing comedy and writing my own sketches and interviewing celebrities. You know, it was like, that was such a dream. The fact they were getting this super bargain by not having to pay me as a writer, they were just paying me as a TV host. I'm sure they would not be able to do that now, but that's what was happening back then.
Were you going to school at the same time?
Yes, yeah. So I was really busy because the TV show was live and it was great because it was live every Sunday morning. So it didn't interfere at all with my schoolwork. And then also I was an artist and this was all very unplanned. Pretty much everything in my life has been an accident and very unplanned with no formal training whatsoever. I've just sort of thought, ooh, let's try that. And I think ignorance is bliss. So the way I got on the Canadian TV show is at 16, I read a newspaper article saying they're doing a children's program in Ottawa. And to me, I mean, this was like Hollywood, a children's show in the city that now we had moved to. And so without any kind of plan, I just drove over there. And I had looked up the newspaper article to see who was producing the TV show, which is a lady named Janet Evans, who was lovely, who has since passed away. May she rest in peace, because she really was the one who gave me my start in TV hosting. And I had no appointment, so I just showed up, and I'm like 17 years old and really just innocent but super keen. And I just said, hi, I'm here to meet with Janet Evans. So rather than them saying, oh, do you have an appointment? I got lucky. And they just said, oh, she's on 5th floor or whatever the floor was. So I just went up and I just totally acted like I had an interview with this lady. And I was like, can you direct me to Janet Evans' office? And I peeked into her office and just went, hi, I'm Natalie. And I heard you were doing a show. And I got hired on this show. And the first year my role was small. And then after that, it dramatically increased to be very equal co-hosting. And she told me, she said, you had the job the moment you peeked round my door, because I couldn't, basically in the politest sense of the word, she said, I couldn't believe the balls on this young person to just show up and go, hi, do you have something for me? So I had a lovely time on that show for years, and really it was amazing. I think I did about 100 episodes of that show, so it was a lot of incredible experience.
Natalie, you've got anybody that goes to IMDb will see that you have a big resume, but can you share some highlights or pivotal moments from your acting career that have been particularly meaningful to you?
I was cast in a film called 2001: A Space Travesty, and I think what I liked about that was that my role was opposite Leslie Nielsen, who is just what a comedy icon extraordinaire, So that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, with Leslie Nielsen, I think you can practically pass out from not breathing. He was so funny.
Yes. So that was amazing. I worked really, really hard. I mean, I think when people have often said, oh, you've had multiple careers, I think I've just worked so hard with all my spare time was occupied with another career. So rather than having downtime, like I never went to camp and I never got to go camping and really have holidays with other people, I would be on a second career. So I was on TV, which did take time and stuff, of course, going to do productions. But I also had this art thing going. And I swear this started because when I was in the UK, my parents sent me to a convent to get rid of my awful accent. I had what was voted the worst accent in the UK at the time, which was Birmingham, which is where I'm from. And in England, we have this really unique distinction. In all of the UK, you can go every 2 miles and there's a discernible dialect. And apparently mine was the worst.
Now, are you using it now?
No, I lost it. They sent me to a school for 3 years. I was at a convent and I was the only commoner in the school. So I went in, oh, is that, you can come to my house. And everybody else was like, well, Mummy says you can come to tea and Mary's coming as well, Natalie. So if you want to come to tea, oh, all right. Oh, my mom thinks that'd be lovely. And so slowly over the 3 years, that got kind of weaned out of me, which was a real kind of blessing in entertainment because it would have been a little bit of a blight with entertainment having that accent. Now, not so much, but back then.
Is the Birmingham accent the My Fair Lady accent, would you say?
No, My Fair Lady. She was an East Ender. That was a London accent. Anybody want to buy me flowers? Anybody buy me flowers? Birmingham has its own unique twist to it. But yeah, so I lost that accent. And then maybe that was also what helped me learn, because I love dialects. And that's one of the things I love about ham radio when I do like D-Star or DMR. I love listening to the dialects from around the world all the way. It's like 30 Charlie and Talk Group 91. I like hearing the dialects from around the world.
Will you mimic the dialect of the person that you're talking to?
Never while I'm on, but I love my ear practicing. And I've done quite a bit of voiceover work and played roles. I was in, like, not that long ago, a Lego, and I played a Lego game, and I played this thug, a New York thug, and it was like, hey, Bats. Now, hang on, I've got to get into it, Hey, Catwoman, come over here. You, Batman, he's gonna show you. It was that kind of a dialect, which, of course, is such a stretch from mine. But that sort of stuff is super fun. And
one thing I came across in my research and said that you're an artist, that you're a painter, you're a self-taught painter, and that you recreated the famous Sistine Chapel ceiling that you find at the Vatican. Where did we find your ceiling, and did you, in fact, do that? Yes,
I did. It is not a conspiracy theory. I, in fact, did this task back in 2001. They did a national search for teams of artists that could paint this giant third scale replica. And I'd already done a lot of mural work at this point because I'd been airbrushing from when I was 16 years old and painting on in a very entrepreneurial level. I was selling my work from when I was 16 years old and airbrushing t-shirts. And by the time I was 21, I had airbrushed over 100,000 custom t-shirts. So I basically album covers taught me to paint. People would be like, yo, can you do this Iron Maiden? And I would just say yes to everything and do it. So come to 2001, somebody knew me. I'd just done a big mural in Pasadena at a place called, oh my gosh, was it Hollow World? It was a laser tag place. And I'd done this like crazy sci-fi ceiling in the laser tag room. And they said, oh, there's this mural job. And I went down and they said, well, how many people would you need to do this job? And I said, oh, I would just want to do it myself because I'm pretty fast. And so they said, well, okay, paint us a sample. So I painted up that infamous, I know listeners won't see it, but it's the famous panel in the middle of the Sistine Chapel where God and Adam's finger are touching. And I did a mock-up panel. And they were like, okay, you got the job. And it took me 520 hours to do this mural. And the LA Times did a big spread on it. I did a combination of airbrushing and brushwork. And I had like quite a career. Like as an airbrush artist, I painted semi-trucks and airplane murals and crazy stuff, that was just on the side to my entertainment career. And so then it was in a restaurant, 1/3 scale mural in a restaurant called Rome on Sunset Boulevard in the US. In California. And what's a really weird twist is it was 9000 Sunset, which used to be the Playboy building. And I did this mural and then the restaurant closed, but I ended up working just not long after designing shoes for Playboy. So there was this strange morphic field of being in this building. And I actually am a believer in morphic field. I believe in the sort of science of frequencies leaving imprints where they have been, and that there's energetic footprints of everything. And that this has happened so much in my life that I definitely think there's something to it. And that's one example. I spent 520 hours in this Playboy building painting, and then I was hired to paint Playboys, not to paint, to design all of these family-friendly, I must add, family-friendly merchandise for Playboy, which I did for a long time. I was their first ever shoe designer, and when I was hired, they said, what are you going to do? And I said, well, it's in my personality that it wouldn't be anything kind of, off color. I would want it to be focused on the cuteness of the rabbit. And I was hired straight away, and I designed sneakers and dress shoes and slippers. They all were very cute and fun. Nothing that would be in like a gentleman's only club. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
We're about to cross into amateur radio, but one of the things that struck me when I was researching our episode, and I'm not putting aside the show business career and the stand-up comedian stuff, and maybe whether your parents did it on purpose or not, probably most likely they didn't, but they raised an entrepreneur. It seems to me that you somehow see opportunity in just about everything, and you take advantage of the fact that you have ability, or you think you have ability, and so you have nothing to lose by just putting it out there and seeing what happens. I think that's kind of amazing, actually. I don't meet very many people that they have nothing to lose. Just put it out there and see what happens.
I'd have two responses to that. So rather than seeing opportunity, I truly believe that we all deserve to do what we enjoy. I believe this to my core. And my dad we used to argue immensely over this point, because my dad had the idea that you work and you do whatever you have to do. And it was almost like it must be horrible for it to count as work. And I just always felt that was absolutely incorrect, and that you can find what you enjoy and let it become work. And I believe it to my core. So rather than seeing opportunity, I would find things I was interested in and just do them. and the opportunity would follow. And I truly believe that's how it happened. Like, I had an interest in ham radio before starting a TikTok channel. So I just had this burning desire to learn about ham radio because I'm fascinated with everything to do with frequencies. Once I was already embarked upon the hobby, then I felt, there's this platform. I could share my learning journey with others, and maybe other people might want to get into ham radio. But the burning interest to do it has always come first. Rather, there's never been a calculated, I see enough. Because truthfully, if I only wanted to make money, I swear I could have been a millionaire multiple times over. Because I've had opportunities, for example, in entertainment early on, I had opportunities to go and host TV shows that I wasn't interested in. If I wanted to be a career TV host, I could have done it from when I was 18 years old and just been a famous presenter or TV host. I didn't want to do that. I had too many other interests in comedy and in acting. So I turned down a lot of monetizing to just really stick to my guns and do what I truly found joyful and what fueled me. And the other second point to what you said is, you're right. With the feeling when you have nothing to lose, that is so freeing. And I encourage people to always embrace the not knowing. If you don't know something, what a blessing. Because you are a blank slate to learn, and you can choose your learning path, whether it's books or videos or in-person courses. I love learning, and ham radio, it's the mecca, because you can learn every single day something new. It's the mecca hobby of learning is ham radio.
And now this break. The QSO Today project that includes this podcast and the QSO Today Academy is now listener-sponsored. There are no commercial sponsors to influence the content and opinions expressed on QSO Today, including my blog posts. Disclaimer: we did not have a problem with sponsor influence when we did have commercial sponsors. The world is different now. I believe that commercial sponsorship, where you watch and listen to TV, radio, YouTube, Facebook, and X for free, does give sponsors complete control over all that you see and hear. The largest networks are now dominated by international corporations who decide in their boardrooms what we hear, know about, how we vote, and what we buy. Commercial sponsorship models for podcasts don't work, maybe for good reasons. At QSO Today, we are back to blogging and podcasting for the free expression of ideas, discussion, and the dissemination of content without commercial sponsorship. It takes everyone's ideas and approaches in our discussions to formulate our own way, with the best information available. This has always been the best formula for success, even in ham radio. So QSO Today is now value for value, following the model created by another ham, Adam Curry, K5AAC, inventor of podcasting and the value for value business model. I create valuable amateur radio content that you consume. In return, you find it valuable, then you reward the podcast with your sponsorships, donations, transcription sponsorships, and using the QSO Today Amazon link. Your supporting the podcast in this way keeps QSO Today podcasts coming to you every week since July of 2014, now approaching 500 episodes. In addition, we have over 500 educational ham radio videos from previous QSO Today Virtual Ham Expos that we also publish to allow every ham to benefit from these excellent presentations. However, all of this content has to be produced, edited, curated, and hosted on commercial platforms by me and my team to keep it easily accessible and available to you. Links and banners on the show notes pages allow you to show your support of the QSO Today project. Please support QSO Today with your sponsorships, donations, and using our Amazon links. And now back to our QSO Today. You talk about your interest in frequencies, and you could have gone to, like a lot of people, my audience will forgive me for saying, like a lot of people in California that went to crystals, but instead you went to amateur radio. Why amateur radio? What was it that kind of first attracted you to amateur radio, and how did you know where to go in order to be able to take that first step?
Very good question, Eric. Well, it's interesting that you say about crystals, because if we want to truly know the Glamham origin story, we must go back to a very sci-fi experience I had in 2012. If we were on a 5-minute snippet, I would never go into this. I'd just say, I got into ham radio in COVID, which I did. But the prequel to the interest began in February 2012 when I had a near-death experience. Nothing as dramatic as falling off a cliff or anything like that, but very dramatic in how it unfolded. My blood pressure has always been very low. So is my mum's. We always get sort of doctors freaking out going, how are you conscious? You know, you should be eating 3 teaspoons of salt a day. You need to be careful. And at that point, February 2012, it was especially a bit dodgy. And I'd had 2 doctors just with routine visits over like my knees and this kind of stuff. And they always take your blood pressure. And they're like, you have to be really careful with your blood pressure. Like, I don't even know how you're conscious. Well, 2 weeks after that, I did have a blood pressure crash. I just hadn't been eating or consuming enough water. It was a hot day in Malibu. And all of a sudden, I didn't feel very well. We can add a little bit of conspiracy fodder into this, only because why not? That on that same day, I happened to see something fall out of the sky. Just by like probably some just military thing and something. But I saw something plummet down. And within hours after that, I had this near-death experience where I felt nauseous. Thank goodness I was with 2 people. 1, because they were able to look after me. And 2, because what happened, nobody would ever believe if I didn't have witnesses with me. And what happened is that I at first felt nauseous and I thought I was going to throw up. And I got up and I said, can somebody help me to the restroom? I'm going to be sick, or get me a bucket or something. I don't want to make a mess. Well, I didn't throw up, but I was so weak, I didn't make it to the restroom. And I flopped on the couch and just nearly passed out. Like, I felt so ill. And which, of course, you could think, oh, it's probably food poisoning, but we will rule that out with what came to be. So they put over a giant, it was this real heavy blanket, which I was very grateful for. And my partner, who I'm still with today, was so sweet and concerned. He put my little dog by me and to sort of comfort me. And they were in the room. And I, to this day, love that none of us thought it was anything. We didn't lose much. So that was very sweet. To this day, it fascinates me, though, that nobody thought it was serious. Like, it never occurred to us to sort of call a medic or anything like that. And including myself, I just probably thought I just was ill or coming down. So here's where it gets freaking sci-fi, Eric.
In 2012.
Yes, February 2012. All of a sudden, I was still conscious. My body disappeared and everything disappeared around me. And what I could see was literally, no kidding, what looked like outer space. And now, because I spent 16 months studying this, a lattice grid of energy balls, flawlessly aligned. To me, so flawless that it seemed surely it must be a software program. And I had never been into science. I wasn't even, the Matrix movie had never had a big impact on me. There was no, things planted in my head that would manifest what was about to happen. So I see this strange thing, and I've got 2 people in the room. I turn over my shoulder and I see them. So what it's like, when VHS cassettes, when you re-record a VHS cassette, right?
Right.
You start to see the original one through your recording. In my gut, what it felt like was when I turned forward and I saw this energy grid, I was seeing the original recording on the VHS cassette. And when I turned over my shoulder, there'd be a fragmented line to bring me back into the living room, as though this was the most recent footage was what I was seeing in the living room. So I was talking to them and I said, my body's disappeared. And I think they thought like literally I must be ill and having like a little hallucination.
A stroke.
Well, they were very compassionate. Equally, they were talking about cars. which I really think was the priority because they're both motorheads and they were talking about cars. And I think as long as I wasn't physically flailing, they were like, we're going to get back to the 69 Corvette in a minute. Let's just check she's okay. So I turned back to the energy grid, we'll call it. And here's where it gets the most crazy thing that's ever happened in my life. I start to speak scientific information. I kind of sit up, and I've come to learn that this is mostly referred to as channeling because it was knowledge that I sure did not have, certainly not in this life. And I just start talking as though I'm giving a lecture. No pauses, no ums and ahs, just really neutral. And the first thing out of my mouth is, everything is an illusion. It is all our perception of an infinite range of frequencies and vibrations. And I proceed to talk with them listening to me, fascinated, for about 45 minutes. I intermittently turn to them and say, please remember what I'm saying, because I feel in the core of my being that I'm being given a look through the peak hole of the universe, through the keyhole, and that what's coming through me is the absolute truth. And I was so privileged and terrified that I was going to forget it. So I said, please remember what I'm saying. As it happens, I did not forget it. And I wrote a 20,000 word document to make sure I recalled what happened. But included in this diatribe of information that was coming through me was, we touched upon everything from people's energy levels being a combination of positive and negative, and how when you meet people that you feel they're negative and perhaps they're drawing from you, that is actually going on. And that if you pass away, your laptop computer has broken down, but your internet is still there. You're a part of the internet, to put it simply. Our bodies are the laptop computers, and then when they fail, they're no longer able to function. But the internet is there, and we're part of this universal internet.
You're still in the Dropbox. You're still in the Google Drive.
Yeah, even bigger.
The interface is gone, but the knowledge is still there.
Yeah. The spirit and energy of who we are, I believe. So I'd give all of and then I'm presented in my experience with illustrations to help me understand, because I had no scientific background. So the illustrations that were coming to me were at my level in ways that I could understand. So then I started to be presented with this information about time. And after this situation, I have had, and in fact, before, when I was 16 years old, I had a time experience, which was very odd in a doctor's office, but don't need to get into that. But it was time related, where I lost time. So here I am in 2012, and the next part of it, after explaining about the frequencies, which was definitely the birth then of my interest in fascination with frequencies, it starts to show me and explain to me how time in our world is dramatically slowed down. Now, because I so believe that it was a truthful and genuine experience I had, I truly believe the information I was given to be true. The way it was presented to me the first time, because I was shown this about 3 different times after this experience as well. The first time was with an equalizer. Do you remember when we started to have our own consumer equalizers, and it made us feel we were in control of audio, and it always had a green tint, and you would see the little wiggly lines going up and down, right? And you could look at one song, the wiggly line of one song, and it would span your little spectrum. So the way it was presented to me in a way that I could understand is that our time is so slowed down that, in fact, the real truth of it is an entire civilization would not even be one spike of that song in the equalizer graph. That you could have just thousands of years and maybe there'll be a few spikes in an equalizer graph. Like, our time has been slowed down for this experience, but the reality is it's so fast. And I did do so much research, so much. afterwards. And I started a podcast, which I don't have time to now, but in 2013, I started The Grey Escape with Natalie Gray, where it was a combination of comedy and a lot of scientists on the show talking about stuff. But when people pass away, you hear repeatedly they see their life flash before them. Well, I believe that the reason they see this is they are seeing the reality of time just before they pass from their physical body. And they are seeing their real time.
I'm thinking about what you're saying, Natalie, and frankly, I don't think I've ever said this to anybody on the podcast, but I also had an experience where I was somehow lost 4 or 5 hours driving in the New Mexico desert and not knowing how that happened, but having somebody tell me in Rio Doso, New Mexico, that, oh yeah, that happens to people every once in a while when they're driving from Socorro to Rio Doso, that they lose hours and can't explain it.
Wow. How strange.
I had just said something about losing time, so I kind of know how that works. I just lost the time. I don't know where it went, but I didn't see anything.
It's interesting that this interview keeps getting disrupted because, not that it's happened for a while, but after this happened, I was blowing out electrical stuff left, right, and center. Weird things were happening.
Oh, really?
Weird things. Yes, really weird. And I researched, and I found that people who had near-death experiences, because what we ended up after I went to the doctors, of course, was that I'd had a pretty severe blood pressure crash. People who've had near-death experiences, they give off electrical charges. So it's a common anomaly that they blow out things. So everything for about 5 days was breaking. Everything. And I mean, even beyond that, it was like my voice was being encoded or not being coded so that people could understand. I'm not kidding you. I got on my Verizon phone. I had problems with the phone. I call Verizon. They can't hear me. I put my partner on and they can hear him. He puts me back on the phone and I'm talking and they're like, hello, I pass the phone back. They hear him. I had it with my brother. He was like, I can't hear you. Weird stuff, but so much electrical stuff was blowing for about 5 days afterwards. So much freaky stuff was happening.
I also get that too. My wife can't use the remote controls for the television because she burns them up.
That's worthy of divorce. I mean, the remote control, for heaven's sake.
The remote controls, she can't use them. I don't let her touch them. For a while, the first cell phones that she had didn't last very long, but I think she's kind of gotten over the hurdle now, and she's not destroying electronic gear at the rate that she once was. So how did you then make that step to amateur radio? Did you somehow come across somebody that said, hey, we have a whole hobby that is interested in this stuff?
Well, I spent the 16 months researching, and I was so anti-crystal. You know, for a while I had a fine art gallery, and when artists had come in, I'd say, you know, you need to write a bio. Any mentions to the universe will be erased. You know, this kind of thing. I was the opposite of New Age. Then when I was researching where this lattice grid, what is a lattice grid? And I discovered crystals have a lattice grid. And there was like quartz grids. This started to bring up radio and crystal radios. And so radio started to just plant itself in my brain. But I was more following the science of frequencies, and I was especially interested in making sound visible. Cymatics. I had 3 times on my podcast one of the leading scientists in the field of cymatics, John Stewart Reed, how you make sound visible. What does sound look like? Because one of the things in my experience was we're legally blind. We see a soap bubble on a spectrum a mile long kind of thing. We don't hear, we don't see what's there. And that, which is a scientific fact, according to NASA, that's worthy of a lot of exploration is, well, what are we not seeing? What are we not hearing? So the frequencies was what I was following. And then we get to COVID. And somehow, I don't know how, I was probably noodling with apps, because I like apps because you get amazing apps for like free or like $3.99. You can have something that people have worked on for a decade. It's like $3.99, and you can be measuring the sound and get an oscilloscope and this sort of stuff. And somehow I'd found this app, Hamsphere. And I was like, what is this app? And I immediately signed up for the free trial, and they give you a call sign for use within the app. And it was my very first time hearing amateur radio operators talk to each other. And I've done many videos on my channel with this, because I think everyone who even has an interest in ham radio should try this app and sign up at least for the 30-day trial. You don't even have to do any more than that. So you don't have to pay any money, but if you like it, of course, go support them. But you get to emulate a ham radio with your cell phone or with your computer, and you can talk to other people who are like yourself, who aren't hams, but you have this designated call sign, or you actually can talk to ham radio operators. And it was during COVID, and I was under lockdown like everyone else, with this absolute bleeding heart need to help. I was overwhelmed with the need, just feelings. I live next to nurses, and I started to sew masks and bonnets, and I ended up doing about PPE for about 174 nurses, and I did as professional job as I could to give, so they would feel really valued and important. And I sewed really nice looking professional little bonnets and masks and stuff. So while I was sewing, I was listening to Hamsphere. Well, this answered many things that I'm interested in. Talk of frequencies, dialects. So we'd have, oh, I'm sorry, mate, I've got to go now because the wife's doing the taters. So, but lovely speaking to you, my friend, and 7-3, and we'll catch you next time, my friend. And I loved all the different we're out in the Highlands today. No social distancing in the Highlands. And I loved it, listening to these dialects. And then the camaraderie in a world where everything tries to divide us. Everything that makes money in the media, it tries to divide us. You know, the newspapers have to make divisive headlines, else they don't sell.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, we are guilty. We can't blame the media because we suck it up. But there's money to be made when you can divide people, and so ham radio seemed to be this marvelous antidote, where there's this etiquette that you don't speak about religion and you don't speak about politics. And of course, 2020, we've got all of this, the most vitriol that many of us in our lifetimes had ever seen. It was breaking families apart, breaking couples apart. I mean, to me, very tragic, because I can't help but feel, of course, that by design, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be presented this way. We can all have discussions without falling out with loved ones and stuff. And I felt, as people's family units and relationships break down, for me, that is like, it's the ultimate tragedy. If you are being divided from your loved ones, is a very sad state of affairs. So ham radio, with hearing all these people all over the world, all signing off with this incredible respect. Thank you. Thank you, my friend. I've really enjoyed our QSO, our contact. You know, you be well, my friend, and here's to you, and you take care, and 7-3. And I learned all the lingo. The 7-3 for listeners is what every ham signs off with, meaning you be well and take care and best regards, And it felt like a secret world that was immune to our other world. And I loved it.
Well, I think you described it perfectly, because I think that's the way I've always felt about ham radio. How has amateur radio then impacted your personal life, and does it have any impact on your professional life now?
Well, I do it all on my own. I do have a full-time job. I'm a writer. I write, for a major Hollywood studio with lovely people. I'm very, very lucky. And then I don't have kids. So when people say, how do you have time? It's sort of, well, if you imagine all the time that you spend with your kids, that's when I'm doing my ham radio stuff. Is like nights and weekends kind of thing. Okay, occasionally early morning, but usually it's nights and weekends. So it has no effect at all on my professional life. I keep them very separate, and I love my job. I'm so grateful for the people that I work with, and to be hired, especially. I write a lot of comedy. I love comedy. It's still a huge passion for me. So I wrote, a lot of the comedic elements that were in the game, and it was super fun. And everybody I work with has an amazing sense of humor as well. So, shout out to them, the people I work with. But how has it affected my life? Well, again, unexpectedly, just like everything else in my life, I threw up some videos on TikTok, and literally my logic was, this won't take any time at all. This is easy. You stick a camera in the lens of your iPhone, and I can go, this is how I turn on this radio as a newbie. This is how, and this is a PTT button. And this is like how I thought my videos were going to go. And that maybe I don't know, I get 50 people looking at my videos, and straight away they just went well. And I thought, because of course I'm a comedian, so I'm not taking myself seriously. I have no science background, no business thinking I have any role in the world of ham radio, but that's part of my dive in, know nothing, learn, and have a good sense of humor about it. So I thought, well, I'll give myself a name where people know that I'm not really serious, and I'm definitely, like, I'm not an expert. So I'm not calling myself like, science of ham or, radio science. I'm like Glam ham. And that was just tongue in cheek that there's not that many females in ham radio. So it's a little bit of just a humorous, hey, I'll be that female that's doing TikToks, It was all with a good humor, and to be very clear that I was no expert. Having said that, now we're 4 years later, and I have learned a lot. I've had wonderful Elmers. I joined Aries very early on, Amateur Radio Emergency Services. I'm wearing this to support them and to shout out people who have interest in the Los Angeles region. It's Aries LAX. I believe it's .org, but you'll soon find it. And Ruzi, W1EH, at ARRL.net. You can hit him up if you want to join Aries, or just look for Aries in your region in the United States. It's across the country. So I joined early on Aries, and they are lovely. And anyone getting into ham, I encourage you, join a ham club, join anything you can with hams, because they're the ones who already know everything that you don't. The sooner you can get help with basics, like, I'm not getting out, did I program my shift wrong? What's the difference between a PL code and a CTCSS? Like, I don't understand. You'll have questions, and the sooner you get people to explain them. And of course I've done over 500 videos now on my channel, trying to make it in the way that I understand it, which to me is very simple. So I try and present a simple way for others. Try and meet other hams. And now if you live in an area where there's no ham club, join an online ham club. Make a ham club. You start a meetup group. We're so lucky now. Start a WhatsApp group. I'm in a WhatsApp CW group with CW Ops and the CW Academy. So shout out to them, CW Ops and CW Academy. And it's free to join. And I'm learning Morse code. I got my paddle right here. I'm learning Morse code, and what a wonderful place to learn.
And now this mid-show break. Every 2 weeks, I listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast with George, KJ6VU, Vince, VE6LK, Mark, N6MTS, Thomas, K4SWL, Michael, VA3MW, and Rod, VA3ON, and their guest on often topical and important projects in amateur radio. This discussion amongst the regulars and their guests remind me of the conversations that I used to listen to on 146.94 and 146.46 megahertz in Orange County, California, while working on my own workbench almost 50 years ago. It is amazing how much practical ham radio knowledge that we can absorb by listening to the Workbench podcast that starts to make sense when we start our own deep dive into our own projects. So join me by listening to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast now and as George and crew push beyond 200 episodes. You can get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast by clicking on the banner in this week's show notes page. And now, back to our QSO. Well, you have dozens of portable radios on your desk.
Yes. Nom, 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 nom.
Are you reviewing those radios?
Yes.
Are they sent to you for review, or are you actually buying all these radios and collecting them and hoping that your partner will get a ham radio license so that you could have someone to talk to?
My partner is so lovely. He did get a ham radio license, but he's busy with other things.
He's not enthralled yet.
No, he's not. But for my birthday, I think it was 2021. He said, "What do you want?" And I said, "I want you to get a ham license." And he did, because he's awesome. And so to me, that's amazing. But it is handy because I can help. He tests radios with me. So we did a test, for example, the other day of these Bridgecom MERS radios. And I did a walk around the neighborhood, and he was at home, and we were distance. And now you don't even need a ham license, but we do the same thing with ham radios too. So he helps me, and I'm really glad he got the license. But to answer your question, it's a combination of both. I have spent a significant amount of money on ham radios, and I don't mind at all. I don't buy like clothes and makeup. Maybe some people do, and some men probably spend lots on grooming these days. We're in a metrosexual era. I don't really do much with my appearance. As much as possible, I try and cut my own hair. Like, I really try and save money. Sometimes I'll go for a haircut. I mean, when I cut my hair, like, sometimes I'll stick a cat laser pointer and get my partner to spin me in a chair while he cuts. Like, that's a radio for me. Then if I've saved that money, I can go get a radio. So I bought a lot of radios. Having said that, now that my channel is so successful, I am 100% sent radios, absolutely, to review. And will show them, and I'll say, hey, I got sent this. And, these are lots of inexpensive radios that I've been sent, nothing, not like... Motorola's not sent me like a APX 8000 or anything yet.
You've got almost 100,000 TikTok subscribers on your TikTok channel. With that number, and obviously, the people that are sending you radios to review on TikTok must think that your reach is extensive.
I think.
Do you have any sense of who watches your channel? I mean, are they other hams? Are they females that are kind of taken by the fact that you have such a passionate interest in radio? Who makes up your TikTok audience? So
I am loving being Glam Ham on TikTok, number one. What I love about it is I interface with the world. My following, I absolutely love. Every Sunday I go live at 4 p.m. Pacific. The only reason I wouldn't go live is if I have an extenuating circumstance, like I'm not well or there's something I'm attending that's important. But I try my best to go live every Sunday at 4 p.m. Pacific, and I get people from all over the world, which is excellent. When I first started, because same for YouTubers. I mean, there's some amazing YouTubers out there. I mean, we can't not give a shout out to like Josh Nass, who to me is like the daddy of ham radio on YouTube, who's just incredible. And he was a big inspiration to me of just the quantity of content. I think he's just awesome. but we get to see a lot of stats. So like he would be able to see who his following is. And on TikTok, I see who my following is. And it started off, it was like 80% male, and which doesn't bother me in the least. As I say, it's weird. My whole life I've been in this sort of male, like stand-up comedy. I toured and it was always male comedians, but there's a shift now in my channel, and I am starting to get more females, and it's when I do slightly different content. It's really fascinating. And also when I review products as well, it's just very interesting. But I have the lump of my followers is in the United States. So the bulk of them are in the US. But then the rest is like all around the world.
Are they hams?
It's a combination of both. So I get lots of hams, which is fantastic. And thank you, a shout out to all my hams, because they answer questions for people. I love it. I have dedicated people who are amazing, who come into my live on a Sunday. There's one, and their screen names is like Texas Dream, Oklahoma Weather, like Oklahoma WX. These people come in and they answer questions, and they never are obligated, but they show up anyway. And I say, guys, you don't have to do this. They have things they have to do, but they come in and they participate. And we have this now Glam ham community, which some have called the Glam Force. And I can have anything from 20,000 to 50,000 people coming through my live on a Sunday. And they come in and out, and some will come in for a bit, they'll leave, they'll come back, but the traffic is very high. It's like a giant Q&A, and it's fun, but it makes you feel really connected to the world, and it's really nice. It's a really nice community.
Do you have a sense that many of the people who aren't hams, who are now part of your Glam ham community, do you happen to know if they're reaching out to any of these other supporters who are hams and taking the step towards either learning about ham radio or...
Yes, they are. Because when I got my license, I studied with hamradioprep.com for my first two, because they were offering only tech and general at the time. And I now refer people, and I get to give this juicy coupon out, 20% off at Ham Radio Prep with coupon code GLAM. And people come back to me and they're like, I just got my license thanks to you. And I get so many emails. And even if they don't study there, they might study in their own countries. But almost every day people write and they're saying, and they have a sense of humor. They'll say like, it's your fault. Now I'm spending money on radios. Now I already want more radios,
It seems it would be worthwhile to somehow be able to record the number. If I was going to do that, it would be like I'd probably put up a form, maybe a Google form that says, if you've gotten your license because you went through Glam ham some way, maybe you didn't use the coupon, but you did it on your own, click the box and put in your call sign. It would be interesting to know whether or not you're doing something, Natalie, that, frankly, the big national organizations have been unable to do, and that is to really build the number of amateur radio operators and get them on the air. What do you think about that? Do you think that these people are, besides being on TikTok, do you think they're actually going out and taking the step and buying the radio and getting on the air?
100%. Absolutely. There's people now who are regulars in my live that since they first found me, the trajectory has been, they'll come into a live or find a video and go, I don't know how I found it here, but this looks so cool. I want in. So that's the wording of what amounts to like hundreds of messages in the 2 years I've had the channel that come in saying, I found this. I had no idea what it was, but I love it. And they have different reasons they love it. Some are like me. They love tech. Some have family. They want to know they've got communication skills. Some are preppers. They want to go off into the desert and the wilderness, and they love that they can use ham radio and learn and get to a high level of knowledge more than just, say, simple walkie-talkies, So that'll be step one, is the interest. Then they'll be like, I'm studying for my license. Then I just took my test, and I'd say 99% of people pass their test. Occasionally someone will write and they're like, I failed. And I say, don't worry at all. Please don't be. And I'll give them a pep talk, get back in there, get back on the horse, don't worry about it. And the big, like my own approach, you see, I try to pass on to others, which is if you feel intimidated, good. It means you're doing something new. You're going to challenge yourself. You're going to fire your brain neurons in ways that you haven't before. This is going to be healthy for you. Don't be intimidated, because if you're intimidated, it means a good thing. It means you're about to embark on something that you haven't done before. This is going to be a learning journey. It's going to fire your brain neurons in ways they're not used to. And this is so healthy for our brains. And I truly believe this. And we haven't even talked about mental health. And I am kind of a mental health advocate because I've had some pretty extreme things happen in my life. I went through a period where I was suicidal and I had a traumatic experience. I have PTSD. I'm a trauma survivor, and the PTSD led to very, very serious depression that got really serious, and I sought help. And so I've been through that to really know what it feels like to hit that rock bottom and have no value for yourself and your life. And I recognize for me, we don't even have to understand the why, but radios make me happy.
As a guy who's been doing it for 50 years, I can tell you that radios make me happy. Probably for all the same reasons that you point out, and that is it creates a community. It creates something that we can talk about that isn't complaining about economics or the family or something. I like to say that ham radio, it used to be like a circus tent that had 3 rings, a single sideband contesting in CW or something like that. But now it has a midway of 1,000 tents with all of the software-defined radio and DMR and all of this stuff. And so there's something for everyone in amateur radio. What have you found that's become your passion in ham radio now that you've been doing it for a couple of years?
Well, funny you should ask. So I love HF because I love trying to talk as long as possible. That fascinates me, that my voice is wobbling around the world and bouncing off the ionosphere and wobbling down to people. Like, I love this idea.
So you like rag chewing then?
It's almost more like just seeing, how far can I get? I mean, and I've got my ICOM 705 and I've got an ICOM 7300 and an ICOM 7610. And I've talked thousands of miles away on the 705 at 5 and 10 watts, which is amazing. But when I got into the hobby, people, of course it was overwhelming. But with my approach, it's like embrace the overwhelm and just allow yourself to be overwhelmed. And people were going, well, you can get into radio astronomy. And in my head, I'm like, what? What? I don't even know how to program my Baofeng yet. Last thing I'm thinking is bouncing my signal off the moon, But what's happened is I've started to take an interest in, because I have, my beautiful map. And I love looking at anything to do with data visualization, like my map. And by starting to monitor things like earthquakes and the ham radio propagation at a site that anyone can go to, like PSK Reporter, and you see those lines, you see the lines going around the world. So I love that data visualization and thinking those are people communicating with other people. Like, it's almost a bit like we're living in the future, and there's loads of free resources to go and look at that. But I've started to become really interested in like the earthquake stuff and anything to do with frequencies and how it's affecting our planet. Magnetism. And I'm in a lovely little group where we have a lunch every now and again at a Taco Bell. And they all know, they're like you, they've been hams for 50 years and they bring little experiments to Taco Bell. Taco Bell, shout out to Taco Bell for being so wonderful and chill here in Southern California at this undisclosed location. Because we go in with antennas and we look like we're planning some sort of takedown of Los Angeles.
Actually, on your TikTok channel, I saw some videos where you're in the Taco Bell with your experiments.
And nobody cares at Taco Bell. They're just like, you want a burrito? And I'm like, I'll have a beef cheese burrito, please. And then I'm going and unpacking an antenna analyzer. And we got people making little dipoles in Taco Bell and talking to people, sending emails off grid and this sort of thing. It's like, but I feel so lucky to have found those people. But hey, if you want it, you can get it wherever you are in the world. You start looking for amateur radio clubs, because in Europe, they don't tend to use ham radio as much as amateur radio clubs. Whatever country you're in, most allow ham radio. And you'll find people, and I have found hams to be very approachable. Their emails aren't hard to find on qrz.com. In the US, you can go to arrl.net and just look down for licensing and education and find out where you can take a license test and where there's ham clubs based on your zip code. So there's loads of resources out there. And of course, there's Glam Ham Radio with I make videos upon demand almost that people have questions. I'll make a video,
Have you cold called a ham radio operator's house? I don't know if you can still do that in Southern California, but you see a big antenna on somebody's house, and have you knocked on the door yet and asked if there's a ham radio operator inside?
Not quite, but I almost did the equivalent of that when I was walking my dog, and I passed a house with loads of antennas, and the guy was washing his car. And so I was like, fellow ham, let me guess, and of course, straight away, we're chatting away about ham radio. Then his wife came out, I think she was, and I had to quickly say, like, I'm a ham radio operator. I'm not trying to pick up your husband here,
Do you have any upcoming projects or goals in your acting career and within the amateur radio community? And do you think that there's some kind of crossover that you could be excited about?
Lovely question. I have a little secret goal, which now won't be a secret. I want to try and combine my passion of comedy, writing and performing comedy with ham radio. So I'm going to try and write maybe a couple of simple sketches that include ham radio. And I know being in Los Angeles comes with its privileges. It's not hard to find incredibly talented performers here. And I love studying at the Groundlings with improv. That's something else I'm passionate about, just studying, whether it's comedy or ham radio. But I love studying. And so I'm in a little improv trio, and we meet once a week right now. And we're all up for them playing ham radio operators. And so I'm going to try and write some sketches for my TikTok channel. And that will serve two purposes. A, it will be fun for me, which, let's face it, anything we want to do, it must be fun. This is my creed. Follow what you love, and the job will follow. The monetization will follow, but do what you love first and forget about the money. And two, hopefully if I write comedy sketches and maybe they go viral, people are going to think, oh, well, what is this ham radio? Maybe I want to learn ham radio, so it will do more to promote the hobby as well.
I think with the exception of Last Man Standing, where they actually had ham radio as part of the television show, I think that most people, and I begin my podcast with, ham radio, do people still do that? I think that there's a lot of people in the world that think that ham radio is gone, that nobody does it anymore, even though I think there's almost 3 million hams in the world. I think 2 million of them are in Japan, but it doesn't matter. The point is that I think that, it would be great to see ham radio back on stage in such a way that people would be asking that question in their brain, what's she talking about? Is it still there? Well, of course it's still there, and it's more exciting now than it ever was, which is what I believe. I think that the old man's ham radio isn't anything like it is today.
Right.
Before we go, I'm curious, do you have any advice to anybody that wants to live a life like Natalie Gray and get into ham radio and be successful?
Step one, join the TikTok Live Sundays at 4 p.m., where you will find hundreds of people dipping in and out who have no idea what ham radio is. And they come in and they're like, people think I'm a spy. Some people think I'm an astronaut. Some people think, that I'm doing something very covert. And very quickly, of course, we explain that I'm not a spy. This is my ham shack. And they're that's a really good starting place, because it helps to dissipate the overwhelm, because everyone else is in there going, well, I've never seen anything like this. And the big thing I like to put out is that it's very inexpensive to get into ham radio. We will not name that who shall not be named radio, that's $26. And I know I have an amazing favorite radio now, which, I won't say it here, get into brand stuff, but there's a new radio I absolutely love for first time hams. And, I'm going to be making tutorials on it on TikTok. But you can just come into the live Sundays at 4 p.m. Pacific. You can watch. I have a where to start playlist on my channel. And then the other thing is, just as I say, Google amateur radio clubs near me. And that will be a starting point wherever you are in the world. Amateur radio clubs near me. And they'll have an email address, and you write to that person and just be honest. I know nothing. This is interesting. Can you help me start out? And that's what we're all about, isn't it? We all help other people. We're all helping other people. People are helping me because I'm only 4 years in. People are helping me with the hobby, and I in turn am helping people who know less than me. But I get loads of help from people who know way more than me.
We're an amazing community. What can I say, Natalie? And I think that you're a remarkable addition to it. What I love about interviewing new ham radio operators, and I think you're one of the newest, you have a different, unorthodox approach to ham radio. And as a result of that, I think it opens up new opportunities and avenues for people that wouldn't get in the hobby because they maybe have this idea that it's just a bunch of old curmudgeons that are in the hobby and all they want to do is talk about their latest liver transplant. I think that you're adding some new vitality and life to the hobby, and it will allow more people to join us, and for all the right reasons, all the reasons that you said earlier. With that, I want to thank you so much. You've been a real trooper. I had a power failure, and we lost the internet connection a few times, but we stuck through it, and we were able to make it. And I want to thank you so much for joining me on QSO today.
Absolute pleasure. Yeah, really nice chatting with you, Eric, and thank you so much for having me on.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you liked this QSO with Natalie. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in NW6S in the search box at the top of the page. You may notice that some episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the episodes into written text, push the Sponsor Transcription button in the center of every show notes page. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes pages. Your value for value support is recognized on the QSO Today podcast and in the weekly show notes. If listener sponsorship is not for you, then please use our Amazon link when you shop on Amazon. Clicking on this link before you enter Amazon will allow Amazon to pay us a small commission on everything you purchase. This is a very painless way to support the QSO Today podcast, and it costs you nothing. QSO Today is syndicated on every podcast platform by using Podcast Index. Use the latest Podcast 2.0 player on your smartphone to automatically get to your podcast updates as soon as we publish. I'm now using Podverse to track, manage, and listen to my podcasts. Positive comments about QSO Today on social media is appreciated as it helps to grow our listener base. My thanks to Ben Bresky, who makes this podcaster and guests sound brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.